Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, President Donald Trump has signed a series of new executive orders to tackle birth tourism that has become very prominent across the United States. We'll have all the details coming up. And a good Friday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app by simply searching for the Nick Craig Show. You can also visit the website nickcraig.com and listen to every and watch every program there as well. Our show this morning brought to you by Melissa Gott and the team over at the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges, lawgroupnc.com. And looking forward over the next week or two, we'll have Melissa on the program to talk about a pretty disturbing, growing trend known as revenge porn and how artificial intelligence has played into that. Some very disturbing stuff. We'll be chatting with Melissa coming up here in the next week or two right here on the Nick Craig Show. The President of the United States and Donald Trump took to the Oval Office Thursday afternoon to sign a series of new executive orders just a couple of weeks after a major decision from the United States Supreme Court as it related to birthright citizenship. The two EOs that were signed Thursday by the president are attempting to ban the practice of what is known as birth tourism that takes place in the United States. The executive order orders the administration to try and root out firms, and when we say firms here, we're literally talking about companies, businesses and that's probably a loose way to describe it, but these businesses that have been set up to assist pregnant women in entering the United States days before they are set to give birth so that they can, of course, have a child in the United States. And because of this recent decision from the United States Supreme Court and their interpretation of the 14th Amendment, that child will be a U.S. citizen because that child was born on U.S. soil. This was a very disappointing decision from the nation's high court back. We covered it in great detail here on the program after that decision came out. And now the president and the administration are trying to continue to work through what I would describe, and I think many would describe, as a major problem. And it's funny because if you start looking at this online and you start looking at at a variety of the different groups that have written about this, everybody just seemingly pretends that this is not a big deal. Everybody is of the mindset, at least on the immigration side, that this just isn't a big problem. I caught this article over at the group called the Migration Policy Institute, known as MPI. They wrote this back in April 29th, so it's a couple of months old. And here's the headline. Though rare, birth tourism to the United States sparks outsized concerns. Outsized concerns, though rare. I don't necessarily agree with the phrasing of this headline and the whole argument that is made in this article, which I'm not going to read through the entirety of because it's relatively lengthy. But the whole premise of this article is, well, millions of babies are born in the United States every year. So if 20 or 30 or 40,000 of those more than 2 or 3 million that are born every year are born under this practice of birth tourism, it makes up such a small percentage of that larger number that it just doesn't matter. I inherently reject that premise. I inherently reject the idea that because there's anywhere between 2.5 and 3 million, 3.5 million children born in the United States every year to either A, U.S. citizens, or B, legal residents in the United States, because that number is relatively high, it just excuses the fact that estimates of anywhere between 22 and 35,000 babies born in the United States through something like birth tourism isn't a problem. No, that's not a good justification. That's not a good metric to use and a good percentage to compare it to. Oh, well, 3.5 million children are born every year. What's 30,000 children being born explicitly in the United States with the reason of becoming what is called an anchor baby? What's the problem with that? That's how these articles and some of these policy discussions are phrased. And I think that's totally insane. I think that's totally absurd when you're talking about, we're not talking about 150 a year, which even at that point you would still say is too much because it's a commercialized industry. We're talking about 20 to 30 to maybe even upwards of 35,000 children that are born under the guise of birth tourism every year in the United States. That's a problem. Great comment coming in already. How soon will a judge block them? Well, that, of course, is what we'll get into during a press event at in the Oval Office yesterday, where the president signed these executive orders. Stephen Miller and his team laying out some of the details. We'll listen to that almost in its entirety as we roll through the program today. There was a question asked by one of the reporters, and I think a fair one. Well, is this legal? Do you have the authority to do this? The administration gave its explanation as to why they believe they have the authority to do that. But of course, as we are well aware, as we have seen now for the better part of a year and a half, practically anything that the president of the United States wants to do that is either in or not in his authority, there is a lawsuit. There are multiple lawsuits that are filed. And I would imagine with this happening, this executive order being signed yesterday, that many of these same groups that we see consistently try and strip away power from the president of the United States using their friendly blue judges throughout the federal judicial system, you would imagine that those lawyers are working literally as we speak to try and draft some sort of legal challenge, some sort of lawsuit against these executive orders. They will court shop it, of course, which is a very prominent practice on the political left. They will get it in front of a friendly judge somewhere in the United States that will proclaim that the president does not have the authority to do this, that the 14th Amendment does not allow the president. And then, of course, we will be on to the races. The administration will respond. Whoever loses will appeal. And depending on how far something like this goes, it could very well end up like we just saw a couple of months ago with the birthright citizenship lawsuit, could very well end up at the United States Supreme Court. This has become the process for the Democrat Party. You've heard the phrase sue till blue. This is the reason it's called that is because of things like this. Something is put into effect under executive order by the president. Democrats, to their credit, and I will give them credit for this because they've mastered it, have done a very good job at figuring out how to get these things in front of friendly judges in friendly courtrooms that almost, it's not 100% of the time, but almost guarantee their success as it relates to these challenges. They have done a masterful job at doing that. And you will likely see, and we will likely see something like that go on with these executive orders signed by the administration just yesterday. And so to answer your question, how soon will a judge block them? I mean, I don't know, as early as maybe next week or the week after, depending on how quickly something is filed. Presumably, the request will be for a preliminary injunction, meaning that the judge will have to determine whether the individuals bringing the suit, which will be some left-wing group, whether they are likely to succeed in the case. Of course, a Democrat judge will believe that's the case, so they could issue a preliminary injunction on these executive orders within the span of just a couple of weeks. And so there's a real possibility that by the end of August, there is a full-throated legal challenge that is making its way through the federal court system, blocking these executive orders. And so it's one thing to challenge this legally, and obviously the argument is going to be that the president doesn't have the authority to do this. That's nothing new. That's what I would expect from the political left. But what is not really being discussed, and what seems to be lost in all of this is the real, for me, the real question. Is this a problem? Is this something that we as U.S. citizens and we as a nation should be concerned with? I very clearly believe that the answer to that question is yes. We should be concerned. When you have got individual entities across the world that have essentially set up companies and schemes where individuals can pay them to go through the process of getting a visa. In many cases, of course, they are lying as to the reason for their visit to the United States with the sole intention and the sole purpose of giving birth and having a child in the United States of America so that that child becomes a U.S. citizen and they can bring the entire family over. I believe that is a major problem. I do. And I don't care if the number is 10,000, 25,000, or 35,000. It is a problem. The left doesn't want to face that. Democrats don't want to have that discussion and debate. I will contend to you that I believe that that is a major problem that the United States is facing. It is literally a cottage industry that has been set up to bring people into the United States solely for the purpose to have a child. We are discussing a series of executive orders signed by President Donald Trump in the Oval Office yesterday. As back just a couple of weeks ago, we learned details out of the United States Supreme Court, a larger debate and discussion over birthright citizenship, whether individuals born in the United States, just simply born here, should be U.S. citizens. The nation's high court releasing a very disappointing decision to claim that birthright citizenship, as it is laid out, as it is protected, as they say, it's protected under the 14th Amendment, allows this practice to continue. So there was a lot of discussion on this in the White House yesterday. The president laid out a little bit of the background on this. Stephen Miller talked about some of the details. Let's listen into this for a few minutes.
Dealing with on birthright citizenship, we had a very unfortunate decision in the Supreme Court concerning birthright. It was close, but a very, very unfortunate decision. So we're making adjustments because it's very unfair. This was done for a different reason. This was done right after the Civil War. This was for the babies of slaves. And what's happening now, people are building businesses around it. From wealthy people are building businesses around birthright citizenship. That's not the way it was supposed to work. It's a disgrace. They're buying their way in. And we're not going to let it happen. So, Steve, if you will, please.
Yes, so today the president signed these two executive orders here relating to birthright citizenship and birth tourism. As the president mentioned, the 14th Amendment was passed exclusively in the aftermath of the Civil War to ensure that the children of slaves would be citizens. It had no other meaning and purpose outside of that. And that's been clear, obviously, since the day that it was passed. You can go back and you can read the congressional debates. This is not something that's even seriously contested by anybody. The president is using his authority as commander-in-chief to sign first an executive order using the new ruling the Supreme Court issued to expand the definitions of people who are ineligible for birthright citizenship. That includes, for example, alien enemies of the United States, members of foreign terrorist organizations, and large categories of people who lobby and act on behalf of foreign governments. And so with taking this action, it ensures that large numbers of people who wrongly would be getting birthright citizenship will no longer be eligible for those benefits. The second action that he's taking, which is especially historic, is for the first time ever in American history to ban birth tourism. So I want you to really let that sink in. This has been something that people have talked about not only for years, but for decades. The idea that people come here pretending to be a tourist, pretending to be a visitor, saying they want to go to Disneyland, they want to go visit a monument or go to a national park, but the real reason they're here is to have a child, to make that child an automatic citizen, leave our country, and then have a U.S. citizen child. It gives them access under this broken system to welfare benefits, ultimately to the voting booth, and all the other rights and privileges that belong solely to Americans. So that practice of birth tourism is, as of the signing of this order, hereby banned. And what that means is that no one in the world is any more allowed to obtain a visa for this fraudulent purpose. It is probably, and President Trump has done many historic things on immigration, too many till this now, sealed the southern border shut, record deportations, record integrity, stopping foreign terrorist entry, record reduction in drug seizures, dismantling criminal cartels, dismantling the gangs, right? Everything he's done that has been so unprecedented. I would put this in the top three in terms of importance because it ends what has been one of the gravest and most egregious abuses of the American system, and it keeps American citizenship sacred.
And just the concept of this is one that just on its face value is totally absurd. No other modern nation in the world, I don't think, allows individuals to request a visa for travel. That's how you can, contrary to what you may hear from those on the political left, to visit countries, you typically need to go through some sort of process. You can't just waltz into any nation that you want around the world. Every nation is a little bit different. Every process is a little bit different. But in the most part, you have to go through the process of obtaining some sort of visa. Why are you visiting? So on and so forth. The individuals that have gone through this process of birth tourism are lying on their visas. They are not here, as Stephen Miller noted, to visit a park, go to Disney World, do this or do that. No, their sole reason for a visit to the United States is to go into labor and give birth to a child in the United States of America. And you heard something very interesting there from Stephen Miller, which is very relevant and does not show up until years down the line. He mentioned not only taking advantage of welfare systems and things like that, but voting. And that's a very key point. There's a great comment coming in on the show. Millions of Chinese anchor babies, when they turn 18 years old, will be coming back to the United States to vote. You know how those votes will be going. That is absolutely part of this process as well, right? You have a baby in the United States. That doesn't mean that you necessarily stay. And a lot of the time, the individuals don't. Sometimes they do, and they'll bring the entire family over. But other times, they're forever a U.S. citizen, unless you, of course, you renounce your U.S. citizenship. That is relevant for the entirety of your life. You go back to wherever you're from, and in a lot of cases, it is countries in Asia. A lot of Chinese nationals go back to China. Child grows up, turns 18, 19 years old. Because they are a U.S. citizen, come back to the United States, and lo and behold, you can register to vote. Lo and behold, you can now come back to the United States because you were born a U.S. citizen under this disastrous interpretation of the 14th Amendment by the United States Supreme Court. And lo and behold, you can vote in the United States. And to follow up on the comment coming in on the show, you know how those votes are going to go. Of course, these are going to be more votes for Democrats. There's a reason why Democrats, like we have just recently seen with Joe Biden, are so weak on immigration. There's a reason that they want mass migration to the United States. It's a reason why they fight to make sure that these individuals are in the country. Why? Because it's a solid voting bloc. As their coalition of solid votes has evaporated away in a lot of different sectors, that being the Democrat Party, they got to find new voters. They got to find new people that they can guarantee are going to be voting for them election after election after election. And so you convince the immigrant community that it's the Democrat Party that is truly fighting for the rights of immigrants and is going to allow you into the United States, whether that's legally or not. And now you've got a potential block of voters for decades to come. That is a real threat. That is a real risk. And again, the notion, the concept that you just come to the United States for a week or two, you have maybe never been to the United States before, and you have a child here. Therefore, that child is now a U.S. citizen and has access to all of these rights is insane. As you heard Stephen Miller and the president say, when the 14th Amendment went through its process, the intention was to make sure that children born to slaves who were living in the United States would be citizens. The idea was not that Chinese nationals could come over to the United States, have their children, and get all of the rights that they needed to become U.S. citizens. That was absolutely never the intended purpose. We'll hear more from the White House coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington, to thank Melissa Gott and her team for their continued support of the program, and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the law group right here in Wilmington. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong criminal defense, no matter the issue, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, they're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or visit their website, lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support of the program. For any legal questions or challenges, reach out to them and make sure you tell them you heard about it right here on the Nick Craig Show. Quick break, more on these series of executive orders as it relates to birth tourism coming up as the Nick Craig Show continues, streaming live this Friday morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Friday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Don't forget to check out the podcast if you miss any portion of the program and get access to our daily show notes and more over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. You can subscribe over there, get access to those daily show notes and our monthly hangout. We get together once a month, chat about all the news, issues, and topics of the day. Patreon.com/Nick Craig. I look forward to chatting with everybody coming up here in just a couple of weeks. All right, we're talking about a series of executive orders signed yesterday in the Oval Office or in the White House, somewhere in the West Wing, as it relates to birthright citizenship and more particularly birth tourism. We saw a ruling from the United States Supreme Court back just a couple of months ago that determined that the president's attempts to block birthright citizenship was not legal. The Supreme Court ruled against him in what I believe was an incorrect interpretation of the 14th Amendment, which essentially allows anybody to come to the United States of America and in many cases on false pretenses, lying on a visa, coming into the United States illegally, and having a child to physically be born in the United States. Therefore, that child becomes a U.S. citizen. And there's a couple of different ways that this plays out. You've heard the phrase and the term anchor baby, and it's a term that means exactly what it sounds like. Because you now have a child that is a U.S. citizen, you can begin the process of moving your entire family to the United States of America. I would argue that is not the intention of the 14th Amendment. I would argue when that was being discussed and debated after the Civil War that that was not what the individuals making those decisions thought and interpreted that situation to be. But that is what it's become. And then on the other side, you've got this birth tourism industry that has really picked up in recent decades, where there are literally businesses in places like China where you can pay them to go through the process of getting you into the United States right around the time that you're supposed to give birth so that you can make sure you have your child in the United States. This isn't people themselves necessarily just signing up for visas and traveling to the United States. There are literal companies, firms that have been set up across the world to help individuals do this. I don't think that makes any sense. I don't think that's a good thing that people are lying, coming into the United States, claiming they're going on vacation or visiting this one place or visiting another place with the sole intention of giving birth in the United States. I don't think that makes any sense at all. The president spoke on this. We just heard a little bit from Stephen Miller in the White House yesterday in the Oval Office. Let's hear a little bit more from that.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. President?
Big stuff. That's a big deal.
Mr. President? Thank you. On the birth tourism executive order, what are the plans for enforcement in terms of cracking down on birth tourism hotels that's common in parts of California?
Very big crackdowns, and this will give us the right to do it in a much more forceful manner. But they've taken birthright citizenship and they've made a joke out of it, and we're actually the only country of size, I think just about the only country, period, that does birthright citizenship. I thought we were going to win it at the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, we had a bad decision, very unfair decision. Our country suffers because of it, and we're ending it a different way.
Let me pause the president there and relay one of the things and highlight one of the things he just said. We are one of the only, if not the only, nation in the world that allows this practice of birthright citizenship. We are the only country, or one of the only countries in the world, that allows something like birth tourism to exist. So for all of these phenomenal European countries that you're always hearing the Democrats talk about and those on the political left talk about that, oh, I wish these places were, I wish the United States was more like this place or more like that place. They don't have any of this stuff. So it's not good enough for all of these socialist utopias over in Europe, but it's good enough for the United States of America? That doesn't seem to add up.
Mr. President, at the Supreme Court, John Sauer, the Solicitor General, did not have an answer as to how many individuals take advantage of birth tourism. Is there a number that you can cite?
I'll tell you right now, hundreds of thousands, okay? Hundreds of thousands. You have one man came in with a family, said he had 56 children. Another one came in, they said they had 98 children. This was not what it was for. This was meant for the babies of slaves. It was right after 1 week or 2 weeks after the Civil War ended. This wasn't for wealthy multi-millionaires, billionaires coming in and bringing 15, 20, 30 children along with them. It's become a big business, and we're ending that business, please.
What makes you confident, Mr. President, that this will pass constitutional muster?
I think it will. I think, in fact, I asked a very talented person named Will Scharf, who's standing right behind me. Do you want to discuss that, Will? You felt pretty strongly about it.
The law is absolutely clear. What we're talking about, as Stephen said, with respect to birth tourism, something that used to happen incidentally, where somebody who happened to be on vacation here went into labor early and had a baby. This was sort of a relatively small problem. What we've seen in recent years, though, is organized rings, at times criminal rings, setting up a system whereby tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people can come to this country in an organized fashion and give birth here purely for the sake of obtaining birthright citizenship. This order takes a number of different actions intended to combat those sorts of organized practices. We look very heavily at denying visas to people that we have reason to believe are coming here for that purpose.
Let me stop him right there. That's the way that this has to play out. And this is the way that I think the administration is going to be able to, I don't know if they'll win immediately in the court system. Like we talked about, there is already, I would imagine, legal challenges to these executive orders being drafted. That's how this needs to play out. It needs to happen through the visa process. Because again, I know this is a crazy, wild thing for people to wrap their head around. You can't, if you're not from the United States and you're not a U.S. citizen, you can't just come to the United States. In the same way, you can't just go to pretty much any other country in the world. There are laws and rules as to how you can travel, the length of time in which you can travel, the reason for your travel. If you live somewhere else and are not a U.S. citizen, you have to go through the process. If you want to come to the United States, which of course you're allowed to do, you have to follow the process of obtaining a visa. And people do it for travel. That's why it's called a travel visa. There are individuals that are recruited to the United States to work. There are work visas. There's some major problems with that. We don't have time to get into those details here today. That is the process. And that is how the administration needs to screen this stuff out, is by diving into the visa process more heavily and denying individuals who we know are coming to the United States solely for the reason to give birth, solely for the reason to have a child on U.S. soil. Those visas need to be denied. And that's how you crack this stuff down. That is how you begin the process of rolling this back and essentially cutting off this very popular industry. And as you heard the president make the comment a little bit earlier, it's not, some of the people doing this, they're very wealthy people that can afford to pay however much it costs. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to have this this third party, this firm, set up this process in which you can have a child born in the United States, all under false pretenses, all under visa applications that are not accurate, where individuals are absolutely lying as for the reason of their visit to the United States. That is what's happening. It's a real thing. And folks will try and throw water on this and claim, oh, it's only 25 or 35,000 babies a year. It's too many. The premise is people are lying on their visa applications. They are coming to the United States and lying as to why they are here. What is the intention of your visit? What is the intention of your travel to the United States? They don't say, oh, to give birth. They don't say, oh, because I want to have a child here. No, I want to go to Disney World. I want to go do this. I want to go do that. So you're lying. You're committing fraud upon the American people, upon the United States of America, when you lie on your visa application and come into the United States under false pretenses. And somehow that is a controversial take. Somehow that is a controversial opinion to have. I don't think so at all. If you lie on your visa and come into the United States under false pretenses, that's a problem for me. It should be a problem for you as well. But, for the Migrant Policy Institute, MPI, they don't seem to think that that's a big deal at all. We are rounding out the conversation on this Friday as it relates to birth tourism, an executive order signed by President Donald Trump, or two different, I should say, executive orders signed by President Donald Trump this week, trying to crack down on a very prominent businesses that have propped up across the world, in which individuals who are not from the United States, are not United States citizens, can go through the process of coming into the U.S. under false pretenses, lying on visa applications. They get to the U.S., have a child a week or two later, and lo and behold, now there is a U.S. citizen in their family, their brand new newborn child, because they came to the U.S. with the sole intention, with the sole purpose of having a child here in the United States. A very disappointing decision from the United States Supreme Court back just a couple of weeks ago as it related to the overall discussion of birthright citizenship, which is what allows something like birth tourism to even take place in the United States. We've been listening to a little bit of a back and forth during an Oval Office address, well, not an address, but Oval Office executive order signing ceremony that happened yesterday. The president being asked some questions by reporters, and we're hearing now about some of the legal framework as to how this exactly is going to play out.
Visas both for putative parents, but also for the people organizing these rings. There's also obviously a law enforcement component. We'll have a full fact sheet released on this soon, but what we're doing is taking legally validated means that are clearly within our disposal and targeting them square on to this birth tourism industry. There's absolutely nothing in here that runs afoul of any of the Supreme Court's opinions on the subject. This is frankly, it's action that's overdue, and I'm thankful that President Trump is finally taking decisive action to combat this issue of birth tourism now that it's been queued up in the way that it has as a result of the Supreme Court's opinion.
This should have been done a long time ago. This should have happened years ago, but we're taking care of it now, please.
Amy, can you help us understand how you distinguish between a tourist and a birth tourist?
Well, I'll let you discuss it, please.
Yes, happy to. And so, by the way, that's an excellent presentation.
Thank you, Stephen.
For those of you who want to do your research on this, Section 215A of the Immigration and Nationality Act gives the president this authority. 215A of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Very rarely used, probably one of the strongest laws in the entire federal code, gives him this power. And that's not the only, but it's the main statutory authority that's being used in this order. So birth tourism is by definition a fraud on the American system, on the American taxpayer, on the American visa. If you're coming here, and again, your stated purpose is that you're a tourist, then by definition, you are here to come for a few weeks, look at what we have, engage in commerce, and leave. So if you're telling a consular officer you're here as a tourist, but your true purpose and intent is to go to a baby mill, give birth, and try to mint an American citizen while you're here, then you're committing a fraud against the American government. And by definition, that visa can and should and will be now denied.
I mean, that's it right there. Excellently stated there by Stephen Miller. It's fraudulent to lie and claim the reason for your visit. You can't claim, for example, and let's just completely get away from the birth tourism thing. Let's say you're coming to the United States to conduct business and you are a foreign national from somewhere else. You come to the United States, and if you want to engage in business, you can do that. There is a process that is legal to do. You just have to follow the process. If you come to the United States and claim that you're coming as a tourist to visit the United States, to go around the country. For example, we just had the World Cup here. Plenty of people from across the world came to the United States to be tourists, to come to the United States to check out some of the FIFA matches that were happening in the country. If you were coming to the country to conduct business and claimed that you were just visiting as a tourist, that would be a lie. That would be illegal. You would be fraudulently entering the United States. It's not just birth tourism. This is the process in general. When you interact with a customs officer and are declaring your reason for a visit, if you are lying about that, I would contend that's a problem. I would hope you would as well. Because again, you are lying. You are setting this entire thing up on a false pretense for your visit. And so, interesting question there from the reporter. How do you define? How do you handle what is real tourism and birth tourism? I mean, it seems like it's pretty obvious. You're coming to the United States a week before you're supposed to give birth, and then miraculously you give birth in the United States, and that's the process. It seems pretty common sense to me.
Mr. President, there's a report that you told donors that they need to get J.D. Vance elected in 2020.
All right. Well, that was I forgot that was the last question there in the as it related to birth tourism. So these two executive orders have now been signed by the President of the United States. There will undoubtedly be some sort of a serious legal action against those processes that the President laid out. So we'll be keeping an eye on that in in the coming days, and of course, keep you up to date. I'm sure it will be struck down in court immediately, and we'll watch the reaction to that here. We'll keep you up to date right here on the Nick Craig Show. All right, recapping a major story that we have been following this week, the saga as it relates to Congressman Chuck Edwards. Talked about this in great detail this week on the program. He announced very early Wednesday morning that he was going to be dropping out of the race for United States Congress. Edwards currently represents North Carolina's 11th congressional district, which covers the vast majority of the western half of our state. This was following a very damning House ethics report released on Monday, highlighting multiple scenarios and instances in which the congressman broke House rules as it relates to creating a hostile work environment and sexual harassment with young female staffers within his office. With him announcing that he is not going to seek re-election this late into the process, there is a meeting that is scheduled on Monday. Republican voters that are part of North Carolina's 11th Congressional District Executive Committee are set to meet Monday night. That is August the 10th at 6:30. They're at the GOP headquarters in Buncombe County. That is where Asheville is, to choose the next nominee. Now, it's not immediately clear how many members is on that executive committee. From my best estimate and the best math I was able to determine, it is somewhere between 25 and 35 members that will determine who their next candidate will be. Under North Carolina law, when a candidate withdraws this close to an election, I'll remind you, early voting starts on October the 15th. The political party, in this case, it will be the GOP. Edwards is a Republican, a sitting Republican. It is the Republican Party that will select a nominee. There is no second or runoff primary election like you're seeing take place right now in South Carolina. Their laws, their rules as it relates to that is different than that here in the United States. So that will be the executive committee of North Carolina's 11th Congressional District that will meet Monday. We'll likely hear from some of the individuals that are interested in serving in that position that will have to run a very quick campaign, as we are now sub 100 days until Election Day. Military and overseas ballots go out in literally a month at the beginning of September. And as I mentioned, early voting kicks off in mid-October. So with all of this, there is, unless something crazy happens, I would suspect that late Monday evening, we will know who the Republican nominee for Congress will be in the western half of North Carolina. The frontrunner that I am hearing, and that's speaking to my sources inside Raleigh, seems to be State Senator Tim Moffitt, the Republican from Henderson County, who has already taken to social media to say that he is in discussions with people that he is close with local leaders to determine whether or not he is going to and wants to run in this position. He seems to be the front runner, at least at this period of time, but we will know coming up late Monday evening who that person will be, and it will be off to the races in a very pivotal midterm election year for Republicans as Democrats look to secure control of the United States House and U.S. Senate. A race like North Carolina's 11th Congressional District could be very important for Democrats and Republicans, as well as North Carolina's 1st Congressional District. So we will be watching that unfold as we head into early next week, and of course, keep you up to date with all the details right here on the Nick Craig Show. Well, that's going to do it for a Friday edition. Thanks once again to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. LawGroupNC.com or 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. Available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. And is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy your weekend. We will do it again. We're back with you Monday morning right here on The Nick Craig Show.